Pretty good turnout, and it sure does. So glad to see so many of you here, and so glad to see a lot of familiar faces too for me. Welcome to our panel discussion today, Bates Alumni in Congress. I'm John Boffman. I'm Associate Professor of Politics. We are delighted to have with us two Bates alumni, Ben Cline and Jared Golden, who last November were elected to their first terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, making Bates one of a small number of schools in the country that not only have multiple members of Congress, but a bipartisan delegation as well.
You did good.
So let me, especially if you haven't met both of them before, let me say a little bit about them. Representative Cline graduated in the class of 1994. Figured there would be a few ringers in here. He was born in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and grew up in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. After graduating from Bates, he joined the staff of Representative Bob Goodlatte, Bates class of 1974. 1974?
Yeah, we got to take one. Some of those here.
And he rose from legislative aide to chief of staff during his 8 years in Representative Goodlatte's office. In 2002, he was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates, where he served until this last December. Meanwhile, while serving in the state legislature in Virginia, he earned his law degree from the University of Richmond in 2007 and became assistant Commonwealth attorney, which in the rest of the country we call a district attorney.
Right.
He left that position in 2013 to build a private law practice in his hometown of Lexington, Virginia. This last November, he was elected to succeed Representative Goodlatte, keeping the 6th Congressional District of Virginia in the Bates family. Representative Golden graduated in the class of 2011. He was born here in Lewiston and grew up in nearby Leeds, Maine. He started his college education actually at University of Maine, Farmington, but left school to volunteer for the Marines. And after serving tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, returned to Maine and enrolled in and graduated from Bates. He then served on the staff of Senator Susan Collins in Washington on the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, after which he came back to Maine to work in the House Democratic Office of the Maine State Legislature. In 2014, he was then elected to the legislature representing the district that includes Lewiston and the Bates campus, and in his second term was elected Assistant Majority Leader by his colleagues. This last November, he became the first member of Congress to be elected by ranked choice voting in American history. And he represents the 2nd Congressional District of Maine, which includes Lewiston and Bates. I'm joined as co-moderator with Stephanie Kelly Romano, Associate Professor of Rhetoric, Film and Screen Studies. When she's not researching and teaching about the human propensity towards conspiracy theories, she offers a much beloved course on presidential rhetoric. And I promise those two topics are not connected necessarily. Are they?
They
okay.
are. Very much so, right?
And this January was given the Krebs Award, which honors one member of the Bates faculty each year for excellence in teaching. So welcome everyone. So for this first portion, we're gonna have a conversation up here to talk about how Bates influenced their careers in public service and what it's been like in their first few months in Congress, learning that job and doing that job. We're gonna save some time at the end for questions. And so any questions you have about those topics, about politics and policymaking in Washington or anything else in your mind, we'll have time for that towards the end. So to start with, Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so I get to ask the first question. Thank you, both of you, for coming today and for everybody and for this great day. The first question is the one that you probably anticipated. How did your experience at Bates and your liberal arts education prepare you for what you're doing now?
Well, thank you for hosting, and thank everybody for coming today. And this reunion has been a great opportunity to catch up with some old friends and make some new ones. And this is the kind of day when you're sitting in the classroom thinking we need to have it out on the quad, right? But a lot of good memories. And I want to thank Jared for participating as well. We don't get to see each other enough. We see each other on the floor, but we're on different committees and in different conferences, as was said. And so we've got some work to do to kind of build bridges between our conferences, I think.
That's right.
But going to Bates back in the early 90s was an amazing experience. I came from about 1,000 miles south of here, and an environment that was somewhat similar in that I grew up in Lexington, where Washington and Lee, Virginia Military Institute, a lot of small liberal arts colleges. That emphasis on the liberal arts was part of my upbringing. So when I got to Bates, I got what I was looking for. The fact that you can have so many different opportunities on a campus like this, on a small campus, to try new things and develop an understanding of really what interests you have, what your goals are, and pursue those goals. I mean, Bates gave me that opportunity, whether it was in the political science department, from professors all the way from Bill Corlett to Jim Richter to Doug Hodgkin, and so you had it all there, and you were challenged, and that's such a critical part of a liberal arts education, is being confronted with ideas that may not be comfortable to you, but working through those through dialogue, through education, through understanding, that's how progress is made. And so coming from a more conservative background, conservative Southern background, I was confronted on day one. But you know what? Those experiences in the dining hall in Commons, I wouldn't trade for anything. I like to say I honed my debate skills over dinner in Commons. And quite frankly, there weren't a lot of boundaries. Everything was on the table. If you had something to say it. You had the right to say it. If someone was offended, they were going to tell you they were offended, but you work through it. You don't just say, you're not allowed to say that. I'm going to shut you down. You're prevented from expressing your opinion. And I think that Bates is trying to hold true to that. It's got some challenges of its own, but I think it's headed in the right direction. So it's been a huge part of me. It's been a huge part of my life, and I'm just glad to be here with you.
Well, first thing I would say is Bates did something I think really changed my life in a big way, and it's a line of thinking that I hope Bates never really turns their back on, which is they looked at me as a non-traditional student coming out of the U.S. Marines as an infantryman with deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, and someone who had graduated from high school. I think, as I told a room full of elementary school kids just yesterday up in Milford, Maine, I didn't, sports was like my best academic portfolio in high school. I think obviously I was able to learn, and I could have applied myself a lot harder, but I didn't. And so the fact that Bates College looked at me, actually came to me, it found me working at a pizza place Bill Hiss did, over at George's Pizza in Auburn, where he went every Friday night for pizza, and it's like all of a sudden he's encouraging me to apply to Bates College, and I'm like, you're out of your mind, buddy. But Bates didn't laugh, and I ended up coming here, and so that's number one, is a real lesson that nothing is really impossible, and if you want to try something and work hard enough for it, and people will give you a chance and opportunities, you grab onto it and you can do it. And so that's definitely it shaped my way of thinking, along with the Marines, to tell you the truth. I also told the room full of kids, if you think you can only do 10 push-ups, the Marines taught me, given the proper motivation, you can do like 100. So, but I would also say that Bates, I came here as a non-traditional student who could also qualify as a townie and the only veteran on campus. So you want to talk about also stepping into campus and like being a little different and facing some resistance in the classroom, but also bringing some. And I studied politics here. I studied early colonial American history and took a lot of religious studies courses. But in the political realm in particular, I think we were taught to challenge conventional thinking and wisdom to take on the status quo and not just establish the kind of authoritative rules that are in place and try and shake up the game a little bit. I was just talking with John and Stephanie before about, I think it was Dorita and deconstruction the other day. I was talking about this actually yesterday at the Bangor Veterans Center of all places, where all these veterans are like talking about in a group session how they feel, and then they go and they write a word up on the board that kind of describes what's going on inside of them. And then as a group, they painted over the words to try and recreate an image that reflected the word in a different light. And I think that's the kind of political theory, like thinking that I bring into like my politics. And so Bates, I think, has put me into a mindset which is probably infuriating at times to some of my colleagues because I will challenge the status quo and conventional thinking and the rules as much within my own party and caucus as I would across the aisle in challenging the Republicans. And so I actually bring that right back to the classroom in Bates College. I was trained to do that here and to try and think outside the box. So I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Mm-hmm. That's great, thank you. The next question we wanted to ask you is we want to kind of get a behind the scenes, more intimate look. And so we're wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like transitioning to the work you're doing now and what it was like setting up your offices and just getting, hitting the ground running.
They just want to know about AOC is what they want to know.
Right?
That's right.
That's your question.
Yeah, no, that's right. In terms of hitting the ground running and trying to set things up, I will say that this is the first time that I have been a boss in the traditional sense. So having to hire a staff of like 16, 17 people, this is new to me. I was a squad leader in the Marines. It's not that kind of, being a boss. I hired good, smart people who challenge me and try and push back and make sure that I'm making the right decisions and being thoughtful about it. And, it's like, that's a learning experience for me too. I think that it's a lot that comes at you pretty quickly. I have offices in Lewiston, Bangor, Caribou, and now I think we're looking at 8 staff in Maine and then the rest in Washington. Fighting for your committee assignments is like a 2 or 3 week long process. Not knowing what you're going to be on can really hold you back too as you start trying to think about what kind of legislative priorities am I going to pursue, because 2 people coming out of the state legislatures know that it's in the committee that you're on where you're going to be able to have the most kind of sway and ability to get some things done. So you're kind of in a bit of a holding pattern early on there. And while there might be like, some kind of pet projects you brought with you that you want to work on, you're wondering, should I start investing in that building, for that push now, or hold back and see what committee I land on? And for us, we just kind of held back a little bit. And I would tell you, we had a really unique experience. Has there ever been another Congress that started in the middle of a government shutdown, handed to them from the previous Congress? What a mess to be in. I can tell you, the tension picked up very quickly. In terms of pressure coming from the public end. And
we were voting on day one. They usually doesn't work that way, where the speaker gets elected, sworn in, and then usually there are a bunch of receptions and things. But we were told, here's your voting card, go vote. And I didn't even know how the box worked to even stick the card in, your name comes out, you have to push a button. It was immediate, and you didn't have time to really build those bipartisan relationships. You were immediately thrown into one of the most partisan environments imaginable. And that's very frustrating for those of us who are used to, in the state legislature, working across party lines, working in an environment where you may have divided government. You may, but even in times where you didn't, and I spent 16 years in the majority, so being thrust into the minority was a bit of a different scenario. But it's the kind of thing where we had to seek out those opportunities to work across the aisle, and we're doing that now, but we're starting from 20 yards back. You know, we kind of got forced back into our respective partisan trenches, and now we're trying to work back toward the middle again.
Yeah, and you know, I would say too, just to kind of wrap it up, because I hate dodging questions, and been so kindly throughout Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But, you know, I would say in those early months, you're trying to define yourself and your team and figure out who you are and what is your style and how are you going to contribute to the debate in the building, in your own caucus and out on the House floor. And there's, I think, room in every caucus for all types, and you need a little bit of every type of leader. And mine is, I think, a more quiet, very kind of dogged focus on issues and work, and then getting into the district, traveling around and meeting people face to face and trying to make sure they feel a strong connection to their representative. And you know, look, I will talk to a national reporter if they shove their microphone in my face if I have to, and like that's fine. I'll answer their questions, but it's not my priority. I've yet to go on like a Sunday morning news show, even though I've gotten some invitations, because it would come at the expense of being back here and meeting with constituents. But you know, I think that's on the opposite side, not just you know, Alexandria, but there's just like among our very big freshman class, like Dan Crenshaw is a guy I've gotten to know.
Right.
There's just some people that really love that like national, like let's go like get up on the TV shows and fight it out. But it's I think been different for us.
We had one of the biggest freshman classes since Watergate, and 2/3 of it was Democrats and 1/3 Republicans, and each one is coming to this point with his own and her own history, her own journey, and it's exciting to learn. It's exciting to. I like to say I play Democrat roulette is what I call it, because not many of us will go over to the Democrat side of the aisle and just sit down next to a Democrat and say, "How you doing? I'm Ben Cline." And this is what I learned from Bates, actually. Just go up and sit down next to somebody and say hi. I'm Ben Cline. My predecessor was Bob Goodlatte. You may know him. And so I'm talking to senior members, and they're looking at me like, I don't know who you are. But and you know, you never know what you're going to get until you try. So you sit down, you strike up a conversation. If they respond, all the better. You learn a little bit about somebody, and you build that relationship. Relationships drive this institution. They drove our state institutions. Most institutions, it doesn't matter, academia, business, driven by relationships. So the more you work to build those relationships, the more successful you're going to be, the happier you're going to be, and the more productive that institution is going to be. So, you know, when we got there, it was chaos, but I had spent 8 years working for Bob Goodlatte. The one thing I didn't know about was how much attention was going to be on the room lottery. And so we all gathered in this room on the first day to pick a number to pick our room assignments. And I've never won a lottery in my life, but I won that one. So of 80 freshmen, I drew number 1. Yeah. And so that means after all of the senior members pick all of the better offices, we get what's left. But I get to pick the best of the worst.
Which means we all resented
Kind of like room here, yeah. So what did I get? Let's see, which I'm not going to say which dorm would be the equivalent. But
JB.
Yeah, JB? No, I love JB. I love JB. I was RC of JB. Don't worry about it. No. So just to show you how the priorities of DC are messed up, the first question I got from a reporter was the Wall Street Journal. Wanted to ask me about that. They've never called me during my campaign. They haven't called me since. But they wanted to ask me about my room assignment. The next was the New York Times. New York Times hasn't called me since either. And then CBS this morning wanted to follow me around I said, can I come on CBS this morning? Because I'd like to talk about my priorities for legislation. No. We just want to follow you around and see what room you pick. So that was my moment of fame. And I've been on a very quiet committee assignment of judiciary ever since.
There you go.
What number did you get?
Oh, I don't remember. I was in the 20s, which isn't bad in the
No,
class
that's
of
good.
80. And just so you all know, just by chance, the room that I chose, Longworth 1223, was the same one that Bill Cohen was in as a freshman representing the 2nd District.
Very
Just,
good.
A chance encounter of sorts. So he came by the office.
The party's waiting for you.
Yeah.
We're happy to welcome you.
So one thing I thought I'd follow up here is what it's like, adjusting to this new environment. Even though you both had experience working on the Hill, you both had experience working in the state legislature, this is a new role for both of you. Now, in years past, kind of like college orientation, there's an orientation for new members of Congress. Did that help at all with this transition? No. Why not?
The orientation is almost non-existent, I think.
Is it now?
Would
Yeah.
agree. I mean, it's, what, a week? I missed it, 2 weeks technically. I missed the first week because everyone knows my race was kind of drawn out. We had a recount and then we had this court battle. And so I missed the first week of orientation, but I'm willing to bet it wasn't helpful. And then the second week was not really. It's kind of just get in there and start swimming. So.
We got a lot of briefings about administration, how the place ran, and
Color do you want your curtains? And
right. And here's how you choose your staff, and here's how the clerk's office works, and parliamentary procedure. A lot of that I had gotten from Goodlad. That was the only time I met AOC. It was during orientation. I have not gotten the opportunity to talk to her since.
And the
then,
orientation is split up, so they have
Right.
like all the Republicans going over here and all the Dems over here. You don't do that together.
And that's one of the most frustrating parts of, and I said it earlier, in Richmond, all 100 of us in the House sit together on the floor at the same time.
Yeah.
And there's one room in the back called the Members' Lounge, and that's where the food is. So we all go back there and we mingle. And in line, it's Democrat, Republican, and when we sit down, we're all sitting together in the back sharing stories. It's very bipartisan. In Washington, you don't even enter the rooms through the same doors. Republicans go in one door, Democrats go in another door. To committees, every committee has separate lounges, a lounge for Republicans, a lounge for Democrats. On the floor, it's the cloakroom. There's a room off the floor for Democrats and Republicans. And we had one Republican wander into the Democrat cloakroom one time. He said he's never received stares. It was like he's wandered into the women's locker room. He just, they were kind of stunned that he had even tried to go in there. But it's very frustrating. We are starting from a place of stark division. And for those of us who want to make changes, the institution's very resistant to change. And we've got a lot of work to do to make it happen.
So one of the things, Jared, you and I were talking about before the panel got started is your frequent trips back to the district, and I'm sure, Ben, you have similar sorts of stories traveling the district, and that's a part of the job that a lot of us probably aren't aware of unless we happen to belong to an organization that you're visiting on a particular day on one of those trips, and yet it's a constant part of the work that you're doing. So could you say a little bit about that part of the job and what you've learned as a result of doing that?
Sure, and I think it's a little different for every member of Congress, but I have the largest congressional district east of the Mississippi River. It's the second most rural congressional district in America, and we've got over like 360 towns. Basically Durham, Maine to Fort Kent and Lubec to Freiburg, if you can picture that on a map. It's big. I came in with a real desire to put an emphasis on how people feel about politics these days and about government. For me, I wanted people to feel, you always hear people say like, Washington's not working for us. Those people are out of touch. I want to make sure that we were putting a real focus on getting me in front of people and getting my staff in front of people as frequently as possible And even if they don't like what they see coming out of Washington necessarily, I want people to feel like they have a real connection with their representatives. And so I think that's all about rebuilding. A big part of what rebuilding our politics is all about. So we travel a lot. I come back generally on Thursday nights. I'm out the door Friday morning for like an 8 to 8 type day, traveling all over. Same thing on Saturday. I'll be in Bangor, an hour and 40 minutes after I leave here.
Are you doing town hall meetings?
We're doing town hall meetings,
Good.
coffee hours, all kinds of things. Going to small businesses, having roundtable discussions where we pull, let's say, farmers, solar installers, SBA, and like environmental regulators onto a room and have a conversation about how can we get to yes on a big like commercial like solar project on a farm to include like a low interest loan. And so those are the kind of regular meetings and things that we're doing, varying from like starting the day having coffee with 30 people that show up at a diner in the middle of nowhere, Maine, and just everyone gets a chance to have a conversation to, last night I kicked off the Special Olympics Maine up in Orono, Maine, and they're having a big competition today. So it's a lot, it's constant, and I love it. So we have a goal to get to every town if we can.
Mm. Yeah, we have similar, not in size. I mean, mine's the size of Connecticut, but yours is a lot bigger. The district is, I have 4 district offices, and I think that's something that a lot of folks, they see us in Washington, but they don't see that half of our budget is constituent services, running the offices, half of my staff is in the district, helping with folks who have problems with Social Security benefits or veterans benefits or things like that, solving problems with passports and things like that. So that's what we all do on the 3 or 4 days that we're back in the district. Town hall meetings are a way that I've found that are really helpful to get you back into communities that you haven't been in a while. I have 19 counties and cities in my district, and so I'm trying to have a town hall in each one of them. And that's where the rubber meets the road, when people can actually talk to their representative. And it's not in a campaign setting where you're knocking doors, where you're just being available. That's what's going to restore faith in the system.
The kind of diversity of things that we do, town hall is like a really special thing, which I don't mind holding, but it draws a certain type, right? Like it's going to be like your hardcore Democrats and your hardcore Republicans, I think, mostly. And like the people that are there and like, you can see them in the crowd, they're uncomfortable because they're like, oh, this partisanship, like I don't, and maybe that's not their venue. So that's why we have like a coffee hour where it's, I'll go hiking. We set up these hikes, like hour-long hikes, and say, like, come meet us at the head of the trail, and we'll walk through the woods, with your congressman for an hour, and we'll get 3 or 4 people. But maybe like people need that kind of low-key opportunity to be heard as well. And I think it's really important. There's a right whale regulation issue going on the coast of Maine right now with the lobster community, where I won't get into the depths of it because it would take too long. But a lot of the lobstermen up and down the coast feel like they're not being heard. And what they're most upset about isn't necessarily whether or not there should be some kind of expansion of regulation, whether or not the whales are really in the Gulf of Maine, or whether or not their migratory patterns have changed. What they're really upset about is that they feel like they don't have a seat at the table. And at the end of the day, that's what our job really is to pull people or make sure that they have
It's to be their
seat.
voice at the table.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're just speaking for our constituents in an arena where they can be heard.
So you mentioned, Jared, a little while ago that the process, getting committee seats is a crucial part of your job, since that's where a lot of the policy work is going to get done. But there was this kind of 2 or 3 week process to actually land the committees that you got. So could you both talk about what that process is? Because given how critical it is for the job of a member of Congress, what does it actually involve to actually get those assignments?
Yep. So I'll be as quick as I can and as straightforward as maybe more than a lot of people would tell me to be. Number one is during my race in 2018, I kicked off with a strong message and a call for new leadership within the Democratic Party. We have, and I have respect for all three of these people, but we have three leaders in Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Hoyer, and our Assistant Majority Leader Clyburn, three people who have been leading the Democratic caucus for 16 straight years. And there's been a lot of discussion about needing to pass the torch and bringing in new leadership, which doesn't, I've told people, like, I'm not talking about freshmen, people like myself, but we need to see, I think, the next kind of generation of people, which in this case wouldn't even be my generation, be given an opportunity. Times are changing rapidly, and I think that you need a new way of looking at things sometimes, and I think that would be good for the party. So I've actually stood by a campaign promise and voted against Speaker Pelosi for that position. So I'm not going to lie, that doesn't make it easy to get your top committee assignments.
Sure.
Oh.
Now, I met with Speaker Pelosi in advance and said, listen, I'm not going to be voting for you. It's not personal. I'm not going to be attacking you publicly, criticizing you, or trying to obstruct you as a leader. But I called for a change in leadership. I think it's a generational issue, and it's time, and I'm going to stand by it. So that was that. Beyond that, I don't take corporate PAC money in my campaigns, and just to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit, there were meetings I had with certain chairs of certain committees that would be like, you don't take corporate money? Like, this would be such a waste to put you on this committee, right? Like, so, you're probably, like, one of your colleagues that does might, like, have an upper hand. That's well, I'll let you decide how you feel about that. But, and it is what it is, I guess. But that's another decision I made and stood by, and my constituents stand by with me. And so I ended up getting on the Armed Services Committee. I'm happy about that. I think I bring an enlisted infantry Marines perspective into that committee room, and there's not many enlisted folks. A lot of officers sitting in that room. And nothing against officers, but it's different. It is, in a different perspective. I think kind of boots on the ground, real life. I think discussions about things like Afghanistan and Iraq, Iran, or other things. And then I'm on the Small Business Committee, and getting to chair a subcommittee on infrastructure, and that committee has been a real blessing, to be honest with you. It's interesting, and in my experience, often the committee assignments I've gotten in the state legislature and now in Congress, the one that you think you might not enjoy as much turns out to be really deeply engaging and interesting, and for me that's been the Small Business Committee as well.
Yeah. We don't have the officer infantryman division on judiciary. We're all lawyers. All come from different backgrounds, but that did take some discussions with leadership. My predecessor, Bob Goodlatte, class of '74, was chairman of judiciary, and he was outgoing, so he did what he could to try and encourage them to keep it going and put me on judiciary, because that's not only my career, but it's my experience in the state legislature was on courts of justice. I chaired a full committee called Militia, Police, and Public Safety. Only in Virginia you're going to have a committee called Militia, Police, and Public Safety. But did all the Second Amendment legislation in that committee. And so knew that I had some experience to bring to bear on those issues. And the other committee, Education and Labor, the 6th Congressional District of Virginia, tucked in the Shenandoah Valley. When I say liberal arts is part of the community, I'm not just saying it. The 6th has more four-year colleges and universities than any other congressional district in the country, except for one in Boston. But all the little four-year, they used to be a lot of single-sex institutions, and most of them have gone co-ed. But liberal arts is a strong part of the valley, and so it's not just an employer. I mean, it's part of the thinking. So Education and Labor was my other committee assignment. And I'm on the Higher Ed subcommittee, and hopefully we're going to reauthorize the Higher Education Act this year, and we'll be able to be involved in that as well.
Okay, so we have two more questions. One of them you've already spoken to a little bit, Ben, in terms of the in terms of Bob Goodlatte, but how have your Bates connections kind of affected your work and the work you've been able to do, whether in the campaign or in the work you're doing now?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm trying to dig for that one. In terms of connections, I think that early on, the connections were very strong with my work getting into the state legislature. So I ran for office in 2014, and it was people like Peggy Rotundo, who many of you know and probably love just like I do, who strongly encouraged me with a group of people in Lewiston to think about running for state legislature, and gave me her full support and the confidence to think that I could do it and that I should, and also dragged me out into the street and made me go door to door. Like, we're going to do this together until it feels comfortable to you and you have the confidence to go do it yourself. There's like a couple of streets like that way, like Davis, White, and some others, and a few that way that are just like blocks of like Bates graduates and alum that either left and came back or never left. And so early on, there was a good, strong apparatus there for me right here in Lewiston to help get me off the ground and give me a lot of support. And I think that kind of boots on the ground support was more important than anything.
Sure, that's not just new student housing down those streets. That's
no,
this continuation of Fry Street.
But there were also certainly a lot of students. But the truth be told, my legislative district ended at everything south of Campus Ave. So like Fry Street was on there, a lot of students there, but a lot of the students themselves were in Peggy's old district. And so it was the kind of alum base that helped me out in a big way. In terms of running for Congress and like connections down in Washington, well, I mean, we're like the only two Bates alum there, and then his old boss Goodlatte. So maybe in that regard, you had a few more, but I didn't lean too heavily on the network in my 2018 campaign.
Yeah, my network was one guy, and but it was a very critical guy. So I got here in '90. And in '92, Bob Goodlatte got elected. And so my mom sent me news clippings. And I remember reading, at the end of the article, she had highlighted, attended Bates College in Maine. I said, that is crazy that the guy running for my congressional seat back home is a graduate of the place I'm actually attending right now. And so followed his career. His first year he got in, so he was in '93, and then I graduated in '94. So they wanted volunteers for reunion. And I found out Goodlatte was coming back for his 20th in '94. And I spoke to Alumni Affairs, and I got myself assigned to the class of '74. Many of you may remember me. As the red shirt, Bates Star, whatever it is. And we were encouraged to leave notes for our graduates. Well, mine said, "Hi, I'm Ben Cline. I'm from Lexington, Virginia, and I'm majoring in political science, and I really want to work on Capitol Hill." And so sure enough, after he and Mary Ellen got back to Washington, there was a resume waiting for him, and it was at that point that his very first staffer had decided to leave, and it was his entry-level legislative correspondent who wrote the mail. So I got called in for an interview, and the rest is history.
I would say that I probably shouldn't say this because you might tighten up like your website or something, but I certainly mined the like alum. Like plug in like someone's name and like look them up, so I could just start calling some of you all out there and be like, hey, I'm a Bates graduate running for Congress. Like, you want to have a conversation or sit down and have a coffee and try and find some support out there beyond just my kind of base here in Lewiston. And so that was helpful, I can tell you that. And in terms of what you were saying about getting a job with Bob reminds me.
Susan Collins.
The job I got with Senator Collins her legislative director, Rob Epplin, ended up offering me a job that I was shocked at the level that that they allowed me to enter into, and that I even got the opportunity, particularly as a registered Democrat since I was 18 years old. And Rob's father was a Marine, but when I sent in my application, he forwarded my email over to this young guy from Rockland, Maine, named Bill Ball, and says look into this guy, see what you can find out about him. And Bill did a quick Google search, didn't find anything bad and disqualifying, and then but did find this article from Bates magazine that was written about me and my good friend going here, Mustafa, who was from Afghanistan, and we became the best of friends here. And I actually ended up going back to Afghanistan to volunteer teach for a summer with Mustafa in his country. And there was a story written up about it, and Bill Ball took that to Rob and said, I think this guy looks good. It got my foot in the door, so
That's good.
there you go.
Yeah.
Right.
Should we go to the Q&A now?
We
Why
can
don't
go-
we,
yeah,
why don't we,
we'll
why
go
don't we
to
do
the
that so we have
Q&A.
enough time for that?
So
yeah.
we're going to do about 15 or 20 minutes of questions and answers. We ask that you do please indeed ask a question, and also try to ask
It's not
it,
a town hall meeting.
right, ask it as briefly as possible. Additionally, we're going to be taking the mics back for you, so there won't be follow-up questions. So a lot of people can get questions in.
So just looking at, I guess, sort of famous Bates alumni like Muskie, Coffin, I can't remember his name, but the guy who does the mustard up north.
Kevin Ray?
Mustard?
Right. Yeah. What do you look at sort of their careers and draw on that for your own sort of legislative experience?
Well, Muskie was a Mainer, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think his situation can be a little more similar, because it's interesting going to college, and I can't imagine representing the district that includes the college you went to and grew up in. I mean, it'd be like if I went to WNL, being back at WNL, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, geez, I mean, a lot. You're going way back here on me, but and I've heard. I can tell you, since he was from Maine, and the political network in Maine is quite small and tight. And the longer you work in it, the more you just meet more and more people. I mean, as an example, Governor Curtis, Ken Curtis, was the youngest governor ever in the state of Maine, and he's from Leeds, Maine, so Curtis Corner, about a mile from where I grew up. Then you hear stories about Muskie an awful lot, and actually I think there's a tradition in Maine, a little bit of stubbornness and independence among the types of folks that we send to represent us in the House and Senate, on both sides of the aisle, to be honest. And I think he's a classic example. There's a good example story out there about when he was a freshman, newly elected, and this soon-to-be whip of his majority caucus told him always keep your vote close to the chest, until the last minute. Don't reveal where you're going. And then the first time he came trying to whip him on the floor, he just threw his advice right back in his face. So, I think that kind of stubborn, willingness to say that I'm not just going to go along to get along all the time. And sometimes you do end up going and working with people, but being willing to kind of stand your ground and feel comfortable in that, and to do it in a way that's still, I think, perceived as classy and respectable, is something that I see in people like Muskie and many others that have represented Maine over the years. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Since by definition your job is to represent citizens, I'm first going to ask a question of the audience and then ask you to respond. The question for the audience is, would you like the representatives to focus intently on stopping the coups and regime change wars in countries around the world, sovereign countries, including, but not limited to, Venezuela? So audience, if you are in favor of that, please raise your hand and then address to the audience.
Well, I mean,
Go ahead.
so what I'll take from that is that you would like us to focus on issues other than what's going on in Venezuela. And one thing that I've been told many times is you can and should walk and chew gum at the same time. You can and should tackle multiple problems. We as a nation have multiple problems that we need to confront, whether it's affordable education, affordable health care. We have, on foreign affairs, we have China, we have Russia, we have Venezuela. And I would argue that Venezuela is undergoing not some outside effort to have regime change there. It's more coming from within. You have people who are rising up against Maduro and arguably have democratically elected a new president. And the rule of law and democracy is something that we should support as a nation around the world. We have to be that beacon of hope. We have to be that light for the world. And so I would argue that being supportive, we haven't sent in our military. We have expressed verbally our support for the new democratically elected president. I think that's a good balance. I'm not advocating for military intervention. In fact, to the contrary. But I do think we should continue to express support for the democratically elected president of Venezuela.
Yeah, sir, I guess what I could talk to you for the next hour about how I feel about these types of things and my views on efforts like those that I fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it gets real complex, like really fast. When I talk about my feelings about Afghanistan, I can go from geez, what are we doing over there? We're not really helping. We're wasting so many resources and blood and lives of both countries. But geez, when I go talk to Mustafa, it gets all of a sudden it gets real hard to say, geez, we should just walk away and not engage in that type of activity. And he feels the same way I do. A lot of questions, and the answers are tough to come by, I think. I think the other thing I would point out is I think you would agree, in Congress, once you give away power, it's really hard to take it back. 1930s, Congress says, we're just going to give tariff authorities over to the White House. Now Congress is wondering, how do we have a say in what's going on with these tariff battles coming out of the administration? Well, we gave that power away to a large degree. Same with war authorities and many others. So as I sit on the Armed Services Committee, I can tell you it should sound easy that Congress would be aggressively making these decisions about whether or not to get involved in the affairs of another country, to promote democracy, to step back or get in. But we've largely ceded that, at least early authority as well. And when was the last time that Congress took a vote on war authorizations anyway? So.
Amen.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My name is Leah Schultz, and I am a member of the class of 2014. My question is about public service. And first, I would love for you guys to elaborate what public service has meant to you guys personally. And the second part of my question is, how do you incentivize young people to go into public service nowadays? It seems like there are so many more lucrative or differently rewarding options. And what is the role of government in incentivizing young people in this respect? And also, what is the role of universities and educational institutions? Thank you.
Wow, that's a big question. Lots of questions.
Right?
You want to go first? Yeah.
Public service is everything. I mean, it's why we're in this. And I'm not going to speak for Jerry, but I think he's in it for the same reason. And you learn that at Bates. You give so many opportunities at college to participate, to give back to your community. The Lewiston community, I volunteered in elementary schools in Lewiston, getting to know the kids. And sometimes that I'll never forget. Had some great times with some of these kids. And when you get into government, it is public service. You're trying to be a voice for your community, and it's a sacrifice. I'm now spending half of my week away from my twin 7-year-old daughters, who you get one chance to be dad, and you want to make sure that you maximize that time. So they're coming with me on the campaign trail now on the weekends when I'm home, and they just told me the other day, Daddy, please no more pancake breakfasts. But that's the balance you've got to achieve to be in that public service role. And universities are a big part. Government obviously is a big part, but it is not the only part, and I'm glad you asked it that way. I think that the nonprofit sector, there are lots of different ways to give back to your communities other than government. Government doesn't have to be the answer, but it's all part of what Bates encourages, which is public service.
Well, I think it says a lot that the first word that came to mind for me was that it's everything. And that's what Ben just told you. Life is awfully short, and I think everyone in this room probably feels like you want to have felt like you've spent your time and your energies as best you could on something that makes you feel like it's been worthy and made it all worth it. And for me, everything I've ever done in my life had something to do with some kind of public service, whether it was serving in the Marines, going back to teach in Afghanistan, serving in the legislature. You want to talk about a public service, it's a part-time citizens legislature that takes up a full time's worth of work and pays you about $12,000, $13,000.
How much do you guys make?
It's like $14,000 the first year and like 10 in the second year.
Yeah, we're 17. That's
so
I didn't realize there was somebody who
it's like a 60-hour-a-week job. They tell you it's like, oh, it's part-time. Yeah, it's funny. And then serving in Congress, this is just for me. I think I've needed, particularly coming out of the Marines, in order to like get out of those kind of hard transition and having post-traumatic stress. I needed something to throw myself into and feel like this is a mission with purpose. And for me, that became running for the legislature, trying to help other veterans like myself, and then serving my community. And it's kind of given me a sense of like purpose and value. I love it. And in terms of the role of universities and colleges, I think Bates is doing a great job. So at the State House, there's a competition every year where they get all like the staff and legislators in the room from Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby. And there's always more people who are alum of Bates working in the State House. But we got the Harvard Center and so many others. I think they kind of drill it into people here, and they create the opportunities for students if they want to seize them. But it's been everything to me.
Thank you. This is just fascinating. I really appreciate everybody who's put this together. I got hope when you're speaking of relationships, making things happen. I got crushed when I heard about you don't even use the same doors. It seems like an opportune time. Do you think there's hope with your class these days to maybe do it off the radar and do it anyhow, but to make these relationships, in spite of the pressures that are put on you by those in power?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So, just to kind of piggyback on some of this, I actually believe that in that kind of attitude about like public service, and we can think about like JFK's famous quote, and you know what I'm referring to. It's just, I think in this moment of like high partisanship, people have this fatigue with it. I really believe that. I think even people that are feeling a certain anxiety or anger about our politics today, at the same time, like wish that it could be otherwise. And in committing yourself into some kind of effort that is a public service in your community or whatever level it may be, I think there's the way to get through this as a country. That's just my personal belief. But I'm a part of a group called With Honor, 16 candidates who went on to win and are in this new Congress. 9 of us are Dems, 7 are Republicans, all veterans, mostly of Afghanistan and Iraq. And the commitment to be a part of that caucus isn't that you'll be like a middle-of-the-road kind of person on policies. There are like super conservatives. There's some progressive folks in the caucus. It's really a commitment to trying to forge relationships and try and put yourself in the mindset of, well, what's the best step for the collective group and the country, rather than thinking purely about party and leadership and climbing the ladder and all of those types of things, but trying to get public service back to a real focus on the country.
Each of us has the opportunity to work in their own circles to make that bipartisanship happen. The Judiciary Committee is one of the most toxic, politically partisan environments. Everybody's mugging for the cameras. Everybody's lobbing pot shots at each other. I think there are 4 freshman Republicans and 8 freshman Democrats. And I didn't know any of the freshman Democrats. I got to know the Republicans really early because I sat with them. But all I saw was this group of freshman Democrats, and we were talking past each other and making their points and then going back to our offices. So one of the things that I hearkened back to was in Richmond, we ate together, we broke bread together. So my scheduler, I tasked her with calling these 8 freshman Democrats and these 4 freshman Republicans and organizing lunches in the House dining room. So we can get maybe once a week where we get as many as we can into the House dining room and just talk. It doesn't matter what we talk about. We don't have to talk about the issues. We talk about family, talk about community, and it's building those relationships from the ground up, because right now we just have dust. We just have rubble. Trying to get a seedling to sprout in that rubble is challenging, but we're trying. We're trying.
So I love that this brings out claps, and you kind of just got right to the heart of the matter. But the other day, my wife here, she's a Bates grad of 2011, Isabel. We were driving the other day to Home Depot and over in Auburn to buy a push lawnmower because she realized I wasn't going to be able to fix the one that we had. Like she could see the frustration building, and but there was this gentleman who's we were listening to a podcast. He's a marriage counselor and has been involved in Middle East peace negotiations, and he was talking about how when you have 2 groups that don't trust one another, if there's not trust in the process, then there is no chance at all for any kind of deal or even getting people to the table. And I really thought about our politics these days and started thinking like, well, right there, I mean, forget talking about Middle East peace. Here in our country with our politics, both sides don't trust one another. The general public don't trust the process. Well, we're in a lot of trouble if we can't do what you're talking about.
You change the doors. Right?
That's right. That's right. We should just have one cloakroom where we can all get together.
All right, well, that's a pretty good note to end on. Thanks so much for coming.